Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. The finish line is in sight. We are about to hit a double-digit football week. Week 10 of the high school football season is upon us. The playoffs are right around the corner. The last week of the regular season is next week. We got teams being eliminated. We got teams clinching. We got a bunch of teams clinch this past Friday night. We will talk about all that, what's in store for Week 10, what it all means as we get ready for the playoffs. Here we go from the top, like we always do here on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We will start in District 6-5A Division 1, where the Sherman Bearcats will be hosting Frisco Wakeland. This is a 7 o'clock start, as all District 6-5A Division 1 games are. Sherman comes into the game at 2-6 and 1-5 after they lost last week 48-7 against Frisco Lone Star. Frisco Wakeland is 5-3 overall. They are 4-2 in district play. They won 35-7 last week against Frisco Lebanon Trail. And unfortunately for the Bearcats, their loss last week means that they have been eliminated from the playoffs. They had to win. We talked about they had to win last week to make this week mean something, because Wakeland and Lone Star are tied for fourth place in the district standings. They're now both 4-2, but what you wanted Sherman to do was to beat Lone Star, beat Wakeland to have the tiebreaker over those two, drop them down, and then have Sherman beat Liberty to have a chance. Even then, it may not have happened, but that was the scenario to keep Sherman alive. They essentially had to win out. They could not lose, and last Friday night they did, in a game where their only touchdown came on an 85-yard kickoff return by Phoenix Grant in the second quarter. Sherman was down 28-7 at halftime, and it was actually 28-7 going into the fourth quarter, but Lone Star pulled away. Held Sherman to about 170 yards of offense. Sherman had 4 turnovers. Obviously disappointing for the Bearcats, who thought they could kind of be in the mix in this all Frisco plus Sherman district. And you look back and you see obviously the loss to Frisco Heritage. That was by a touchdown. They're tied for second place. That was a game that was 13-6. You have a team right now that's right in front of you, Frisco Centennial, that you lost to 14-7. If you just take those two games, you're sitting at 3-2, or excuse me, at 3-3, and you're a game back with 2 games to play. But unfortunately, it's been a struggle for Sherman to get things going offensively. This last game continued that trend, not getting any points on offense. Jacavian Hughes led the running attack with 45 yards on 8 carries. Caleb Orr had his first rough game since he moved into a more prominent role at quarterback for about the past month. 11 of 21 for 85 yards, 2 interceptions. Phoenix Grant, we talked about, he had the kickoff return. He also led the receivers, 6 catches for 51 yards. And so now you've got Sherman. They've got 2 games left. They got this game at home against Wakeland, the last home game of the season, and then they're going to go on the road against a Liberty team that you assume at that point is going to be winless. They play who do they play this week? They play Lebanon. Okay, so now you have a Liberty team next week that's going to play Lebanon Trail. They're both winless on the season, so somebody there's going to get their first win. So either Liberty's going to come off a win going into that last game against Sherman, or they're going to come in at 0-9 and 0-7. And so if you're Sherman, you want to you want to show a little bit of pride. You want to finish as strong as you can. Obviously, that game last week looks like it's a winnable one, but you're also in a position right now, which I know you don't want to be in, which is a spoiler. But if you can knock off Frisco Wakeland, that's going to hurt their chances as they try to battle Lone Star to the end to get into the playoffs, since they're tied with them with 2 games left. And Wakeland has the tiebreaker because they beat Lone Star. So to knock them down a peg would seriously hurt their chances, especially because they have Frisco to finish, and so that's going to be a tough game as well. And Heritage plays Lone Star, so there's a lot of big games at the top of the district next week, and you can have a direct effect if you're able to come out and do something on your home field and finish strong. If you're a senior, you want to go out strong. If you're an underclassman, which they obviously have a handful on both sides of the ball, to finish strong, go into the offseason on a positive note as you try to prepare for your next season, whatever grade you may be going into, whether it's your senior year or your junior year, to make things happen a little better next year. So unfortunately, Sherman eliminated with 2 games to go. We're kind of hoping we have these last couple games mean something, and then if you had one out, and you get to 4-4. Let the chips fall where they may, and if they were going to need some help, we wouldn't know what that help would be until going into the final week after we see the results from this one. But unfortunately, it was not in the stars for them to be in that mix until the final week. So we'll see how Sherman can do when they host Frisco Wakeland at 7 p.m. At Bearcat Stadium on Friday night. Next game on the schedule is a game with some big playoff implications as Denison travels to Crandall. Denison is 4-4 overall and 2-3 in district play after they won last week 67-26 against Princeton. And Crandall is sitting at 6-2 and 3-2 in district play. They won 36-29 against Terrell. And this is it's more of a huge game for Denison than it is for Crandall. Crandall can't afford a loss. Denison might be able to afford a loss, but you don't want to put your fate in a lot of other people's hands. And we have talked about with Denison going into last week, they could actually win out and not get in. Again, in a situation that was similar to what Sherman was facing. You do what you can, the best you can, and then you have to see what happens. But Melissa and Lovejoy, both 5-0, they're doing what we expected, setting up that showdown like we've talked about for the last week of the season. They have already clinched the 2 playoff spots. There were 2 spots up for grabs. If Crandall wins on Friday, they will clinch a playoff spot and will most likely lock in the 3rd spot. The only logistic losses they've had are to Lovejoy and Melissa. And then you have Denison, who, again, with 2 games remaining, is tied for 4th place. Now it's a 3-way tie. Denison, Mesquite Poteet, and Terrell. And Denison and Mesquite Poteet play the final week of the season. So somebody's going to win that. Somebody's going to lose it and get that 4th loss. The only question is going to be what is going to happen with Terrell. Because Terrell has the tiebreaker over Denison because that game is already played, and they're going to play Mesquite Poteet this week. So one of those 2 is going to be at a 4th loss, and the question is it going to be Terrell or is it going to be Mesquite Poteet? If you're a Denison fan, you are rooting for Mesquite Poteet, because if you can get Terrell to that 4th loss, and you can win out by beating Crandall and then beating Mesquite Poteet, then that would get you in as a playoff team. Also, what could happen is if you lose to Crandall and Terrell beats and Poteet beats Terrell, if you beat Mesquite Poteet, then you could be looking at a 3-way tie for the final playoff spot. And then it's going to come down to points. So if you're a Denison fan, you're rooting for Mesquite Poteet to find a way to beat Terrell. That's what you're hoping for. Unfortunately, so far, Terrell has only lost to the top 3, so they're gonna have a tiebreaker if you get into a head-to-head matchup with them. If you're Denison because of the loss, so it would go a long way if you can pull out the win against Crandall. Obviously, Crandall's having a really good season. They are 6-2. Their only losses are to the top 2 teams in the district. They obviously beat Terrell, who's a team that Denison lost to. But you have this Denison team that had a huge win last week 67-26. Third most points they've ever scored in a game. It was 14-0 after the first quarter, and 34-12 at halftime, and then another big third quarter to get to 60 points going to the fourth quarter, which actually was a running clock. And for those who saw my story and saw my tweets, Denison got to 67 points, 568 yards of offense, or 567 yards of offense, and they did not touch the ball on offense the final 14 minutes of this game. So that's how good the offense was in this game. Josh Kurtenbach, 268 yards passing, 16 of 20, setting a single game completion record for at least 20 attempts. He also ran 9, and he threw for 3 touchdowns. He ran 9 times for 218 yards and 2 touchdowns. Denison had a special teams touchdown. Javon Cleveland recovered the opening kickoff in the end zone for a touchdown. There were 2 defensive touchdowns. Kenyon Kelly had a 100-yard interception return for a score, and Cavante Hain had a 29-yard fumble return for a score. You look at the passing numbers we talked about with Kurtenbach. He connected with Kyson Lusain, 4 catches, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Ryder Poole's lone catch was a touchdown, 39-yarder. Ty Rhodes' only catch was a 28-yard touchdown. Ty Kirkbride, 7 catches for 73 yards. Grant Yerkes had 13 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown. Latrell Jeffrey added a touchdown on the ground. And I will point out, too, that all of this, the 299 yards rushing, 268 yards passing, also came with Jack Alleman, Denison's leading rusher, getting 1 carry, very limited snaps, was dealing with a collarbone injury. This was more of a, hey, if we need you type of a situation. He was dressed, ready to go. He'll be ready to go against Crandall. That was just kind of a precautionary thing. They didn't have to use him, when you're up, when you're able to produce what they were able to produce. And we talked about last week, you got these 3 games left. You got to beat Princeton. You got to beat Mesquite Poteet. And what are you going to do against Crandall? Well, they lost 3 games in a row. Snap that streak in a big way. Obviously, they should be feeling confident. They looked really good on offense. They did use the extra lineman type thing like they did against Melissa. That really sort of sparked them, nearly pull that upset. You put up 44 points there. You put up 67 points there. But Crandall's a high-scoring team too, and so I think this does have the potential to be a shootout, and we'll see what happens. But like I said, there's a lot of key games in the district this week. That Terrell Poteet game is obviously one to watch as well. But that's what you expect in a district like this, coming down the stretch, and to know, hey, you could go 4-3 and not make the playoffs. It's disappointing that you could be better than half the teams in the district, but not get in. And unfortunately that's life. Unfortunately that's a life Denison has lived a couple of times recently by losing out on a playoff spot by a tiebreaker. And like I said, they'd go a long way towards getting in with a trip to Crandall on Friday night. We'll see what happens. That's the game I'll be at, of course, and we'll see what if they can keep this momentum, and if you do that, like we said, it sets you up for and I will point out too, you could also put some pressure on some people next week because you're playing on a Thursday, so there is a chance that people will know what has happened in your game, and therefore that may affect how they approach their games as well. So, but it should be a good one. I think it's going to be a high scoring game, and we'll see what happens when Denison visits Crandall on Friday night. We go down to 4A, and we will check in on the Van Alstyne Panthers, who are now 5-4 and 4-1 in District 5 4A Division II play. And this week they end their season because they have the district bye in week 11. So this is their 10th game this week as they travel to Gainesville. Gainesville is 3-5 and 3-1 in district play. They had the bye last week. So again, sort of this interesting thing where you have Van Alstyne playing a team off a bye. what is that going to mean in terms of that team being healthier? Is the rest versus rust? Are they going to come out shaky? And last week we talked about it's another key game. We talked about last week how the Van Alstyne Bridgeport matchup was a huge game. To clinch a playoff spot, get that done, not have to worry about that. And Van Alstyne did that with a 38-13 win. Again with a strong ground game, over 300 yards, led by Jaden Mahan, 19 carries, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dakota Howard, 12 carries, 72 yards, 2 touchdowns. Foster Cataldi added a touchdown run. Michael Upchurch recovered a blocked PAT and brought that back for 2 points at a key point in the second quarter when it looked like Bridgeport was gonna get back in this thing a little bit, make it 14-7. Instead, they were down 16-6. And then Van Alstyne scores right before the halftime to go up 23-6. And then Bridgeport didn't score again until after the Panthers had gone up 38-6 in the middle of the fourth quarter. So really nice effort there to maintain that hold on second place. Like we said, it clinched a playoff spot. So that keeps them in a spot where they can control their own destiny for seeding. And that will come this week against Gainesville, who is a little bit of a surprise. We have kind of mentioned them a little bit just because throughout this district play, they got off to a good start. They were 0-4 coming into district play, which was a little bit of a disappointment. I think some people thought that they would be better, but obviously they come in at 0-4, and then district play gets underway, and they win the first game, and then they win the second game, and then they win the third game, and so now they're 3-0, and you're like, well, wait a second, how did this happen? And they ended up losing they lost the second game to Aubrey, which I think everybody kind of expected. But then they bounced back with two wins, and so now they're sitting at 3-1, and so they've got a chance if they win this game to control their destiny to be the second seed. Aubrey has already clinched the number 1 seed. They are still undefeated, and they have a bye. They have the bye this week, I believe. Because Van Alstyne has a bye next week. So Aubrey has the bye this week, and they're guaranteed no matter what happens in the Van Alstyne Gainesville game. Even if they somehow were to tie either of them, they have the tiebreaker. So they have clinched the number 1 seed. So now you have Van Alstyne Gainesville battling for the 2 seed. Gainesville will get that with a win. And Van Alstyne will get that with a win, and Gainesville will get that with a win as well, because if they lose their last game, they'll be back tied with Van Alstyne. So this is, I mean, if you want it, you can treat it as a playoff game, and if I'm Van Alstyne, I really probably want to treat it as a playoff game, because you're going to go 2 weeks without playing a game, and of course that's we can talk about that next week or when we get ready to start the playoffs about what that means in terms of having to wait 2 weeks before playing your first playoff game. That's just bad luck of the draw there. But so far, Van Alstyne has done what they needed to do to get to the spot where they are. But at the very least, they're in the playoffs. Gainesville has not clinched a playoff spot, even at 3-1, because of the teams behind them. They could end up in a potential multiple tie there. So Gainesville has a lot to play for. They want to lock up a playoff spot. They don't want to have that come down to the last week as well. So this should be a really interesting game. I will point out, too, that these teams have played the last couple of years. Well, they didn't play in 2020. That was a COVID cancellation situation, and Van Alstyne had to scramble to find an opponent. But they did play last year. Van Alstyne won 45-29. So take that for what it's worth. It's going to be interesting to see. I think Van Alstyne's in a good spot. Some of the wins that Gainesville's had, they have been close. If you want to compare, scores, that sort of thing, Van Alstyne has beaten those opponents better. But obviously, if you're Gainesville, you're feeling pretty confident because you've gotten on this roll in district play, so it's going to be interesting to see what the results is there. And like I said, we'll know what seed Van Alstyne's going to be after they travel to Gainesville on Friday and then have the bye to end the regular season next week. We will touch on the fact that Whitesboro did not play because they are back in it in 4-3A Division I action this week, and it's a barn burner. I think we might label this one the game of the week. They will be hosting Paradise. So Whitesboro, as we know, is 6-1, 3-1. Did not play last week. Paradise is 8-1 and 4-1. They lost to Brock, and that was a close game to Brock, much like Whitesboro had the week before. They lost 18-13. Had a chance to win. Brock goes down late, pulls out the victory. So Brock is 4-0. Paradise is 4-1, and Whitesboro is 3-1. So there was the potential for a three-way tie. There is now not that chance unless Brock slips up, which I don't think they're going to against the rest of this district because everybody in this district has a losing record in district play. So if you're Paradise and Whitesboro, you are playing for second place, and most likely the winner of this game is going to get second place. The reason for that is because Paradise finishes with a bye. So if you give them a second loss, if you're Whitesboro, if you were to somehow lose your last game, which is against Ponder, you'd be back in a tie at 4-2 with Paradise. So as long as Brock takes care of business the next two games, which we assume that they will, just based on their profile and the fact that they are playing Ponder and Pilot Point, this is essentially a game for the second seed. Again, going to be interesting to see what happens. Whitesboro is coming off their bye. Both teams have clinched playoff spots, so there's nothing nervous that you have to worry about there. This is a game last year that was close, 35-28. So you have two teams that were pretty evenly matched last year. And I think it's this. I think that's why I think this is the game of the week. I think you have two teams whose only losses are to Brock. So I mean, if this game was a couple weeks earlier, you would have had 6-0 Paradise versus 6-0 Whitesboro. They both played Brock within obviously 4 or 5 points apiece. So I think it's very obvious they're pretty even in terms of this matchup. It's at Whitesboro, so that's obviously a good note for them. And like I said, I'm really interested to see this score. And again, it's one of those where in the end it may not end up mattering. We've talked about this with Whitesboro. They got on a run, not being a district champion, not being a high seed, being overlooked in the region. People not really expecting a whole lot of anything from them, and they went all the way to the region final. And I think honestly, if you look at all three of these teams in this district, I think all three of them might have that capability, and they're whoever gets second and third, you're obviously going to have to potentially do a rematch a couple rounds deep, and I don't think it's going to matter if you're the second seed or the third seed. They're both going to avoid the fourth seed, which right now that would go to Boyd, where you would have to play Brock in the region semifinals instead of in the region final. So you'd be able to go one round deeper if you get that far. And honestly, if these three teams were three of the four remaining teams, I would not be surprised if that was the case. So going to be interesting to watch what comes out of the Paradise at Whitesboro game in 4-3A Division I action Friday night. Jumping over to 5-3A Division I, the Pottsboro Cardinals, the first place Pottsboro Cardinals, are hosting Commerce. And this is a key game for both teams from the standpoint of playoff seeding for Pottsboro and the playoffs for Commerce. Pottsboro is 7-1 and 4-0 after they won last week 52-7 against Emory Reigns, while Commerce is coming off a 44-24 loss against Mount Vernon, who is, when we talk about the standings in this district, so Pottsboro is 4-0, Winsboro's 4-1, Mount Vernon is 4-1, and Commerce is 2-2, and they are in the driver's seat, at least right now, for a playoff spot. But they're going to play Mineola the final week, and so that's going to end up determining the last playoff spot. The winner of that's probably going to get in, the loser is going to be out. And then Pottsboro finishes with Mount Vernon next week as well. Mount Vernon has the bye this week, and Winsboro has the bye to finish. So all eyes are going to be on Pottsboro and Mount Vernon at the end, because you could have a three-way tie potentially for first place. And we've talked about in the past, tiebreakers have been common, and ties atop this district. It's been a very competitive district, and obviously there's three teams that are standing out. Pottsboro being one of them. They jumped up early on Emory Reigns, like we kind of figured they would. Reigns only has the one win on the season coming, and so Pottsboro's up 49-7 at halftime, and that game put that game away relatively quickly. Major McBride, 13 carries, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also returned a fumble for a touchdown. Halen Flanagan, 9 of 12 passing, 222 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 of them to Reed Thompson, who had 3 catches for 124 yards. Carson Gibson, 3 catches, 71 yards, and the other touchdown. Flanagan also with a touchdown run, and pretty quick work against a team that's obviously out of the playoff chase. And people want to talk about trap games. Could this be a trap game for Pottsboro? I think it could. You have you have that game looming against Mount Vernon that everybody knows is essentially for an outright district championship. I don't think you want to overlook a Commerce team, obviously, that it knows it has to win next. I mean, that's kind of interesting when you think about it. If you're Commerce, if you beat Pottsboro, but then you lose to Mineola, you could still miss the playoffs. So I wonder if this is, I don't want to say sort of a trap game in that, well, they're more focused on, we know we have to beat Mineola next week. This game is not as important. And that it could be the double trap game. That's rather rare, and I wonder how that plays into the fact that they have to come to Pottsboro as well. Obviously they've been in this district before. Last year this was a 65-28 Pottsboro win. I don't feel like Pottsboro is going to overlook them, but you never know. Commerce is trying to make the playoffs for the first time since 2019. So you have a lot of kids. I guess this is when the senior class there were freshmen. So obviously you have a lot of kids that are trying to make the playoffs for the first time in their time at Commerce. But I think that's good. I think you can stay in your rhythm if you're Pottsboro. You know what's coming ahead. I think people talked about how would they do. How would it look against Emory Reigns? Coming off of the week before. You have that physical game, emotional comeback to beat Winsboro by a point, and then you got to turn around and play a team that's not very good. Well, they put all that behind them, and they came out and made sure that this game was over at halftime, which it was. So, I feel Pottsboro's sort of on a mission. That they've been very good. We talked about their only losses to Whitesboro that came down to the final drive. They could have easily won that game. They could be sitting undefeated at this point in the season. They've taken on all the other comers and they've vanquished them. The one to end is obviously going to be a pretty big one. But I think Pottsboro is going to hold serve here at home. And send Commerce into a game against Mineola where the winner of that game is in and the loser of that game against Mineola is out. So we'll see for sure what happens when Pottsboro hosts Commerce in 5-3A Division 1. Dropping down to the Division 2, we will go to 6-3A Division 2, and SNS is hosting Henrietta. Henrietta is 4-4 and 0-3 after they lost 34-23 against Callisburg, and SNS is 1-7 and 0-3 after they lost to Holiday 61-0. We said that was going to be a tough game for SNS. They are number 2 in the statewide rankings behind Gunner, and they played like it. Although, maybe to give SNS a little bit of credit, you look at the score by quarter, it's only 7-0 after the first quarter. It's 28-0 at halftime, which is somewhat respectable, considering the quality of the opponent. But again, we've talked about SNS has really struggled with, being very consistent on offense and didn't really get a whole lot going in that regard in this one. Barely getting to 60 yards of total offense, and Holiday with a big game on the ground, putting together over 500 yards just on the ground. They didn't have to throw it a lot, and they didn't. So if you're SNS, it comes down to you're actually in the playoff hunt at this point, but you got to win this week. If you lose this week, you are officially out. If you win this week, you've got a chance, because you're gonna finish with City View, and if City View sitting in third place, obviously Holiday and Callisburg both 3-0, both have clinched playoff spots. City View is 2-1, Valley View is 1-2, and then SNS and Henrietta are sitting at 0-3. So if you win your last two, you got a shot. It may come down to a tiebreaker. You may need some help, but you can stay alive. So we'll see what SNS can do. Henrietta is obviously, we talked about at the start of district play. They got off to a really good start to their season. That was kind of interesting, and obviously they've lost all three of their district games so far. So if you're able to find a way to pull this game out, you've got a chance going into the last game of the season to say to yourselves, hey, as long as we win, we've got a chance. We may need some help, and we won't know what that will be until after the games this week. But if we win the last two, we've done all we can, and that might sneak in as the fourth place team. And if there's a three-way tie, maybe potentially that could get you a third place. I don't know. We won't know that until we see some of the results. But hopefully SNS can get a little positive momentum here at the end, and maybe find themselves playing for something in the final week of the season, despite the early struggles that they have had. So we'll see what happens when they host Henrietta on Friday night. Jumping over to District 8-3A Division 2, we have 3 games split amongst the 3 teams this week. We don't have the all-local matchup in this district for the first time in this district. And we'll look at the standings real quick because that will lead into our discussion of these teams. Gunner sitting at 3-0. Bells and Leonard are both 2-1. Howe and Blue Ridge are 1-2, and Lone Oak is 0-3. And we've talked about the way things are going. This is another huge swing week in this district. We'll talk about the game that has the big swing in it, and that's the Howe Bulldogs hosting Blue Ridge. So you have these two teams tied for fourth place going into this matchup. I don't want to say the loser is out, but the loser of this game is going to have a really hard time sneaking into the playoffs. Blue Ridge is coming off a 20-14 loss against Leonard, while Howe lost 37-14 against Bells. So Blue Ridge is now 4-4, 1-2, and we mentioned Howe obviously at 1-2. They're 5-3 overall on the season. And we talked about that game against Bells last week. Again, we talked about Gunner Howe. The Bulldogs were able to hang around in that one. Same thing here. It's only 13-6 at halftime, with Bells holding a lead. But unfortunately, Howe was not able to put together anything in the third quarter. Bells was able to open up the 37-7 lead before Howe scored again. Of note for Howe in this one, Antoine Rattler, 18 carries, 59 yards, and a touchdown. Cooper Jones also had a touchdown run, one of his patented 1-yard leap over the pile touchdowns that seem to happen, every week these days. Austin Haley, 15 of 33 passing, 179 yards. Braden Ulmer was his top target in this one. 7 catches, 97 yards. Jones also had a couple catches for 29 yards. So if you're Hal, you're still in a pretty good spot. You've obviously lost, like we've said, to what we think are the 2 best teams, and you've beaten the team that's in front of you. So you have Blue Ridge, who you're tied with, and Lone Oak next week to close out the season. And if you take care of business this week and next week, you're definitely in. And then the question is, how good of a seeding can you get? But you got to take care of business this week. We mentioned Blue Ridge has lost to Leonard last week in a close game. We talked about that was going to be a huge swing game, and it was. And if you're Blue Ridge, you've got to win this week to have a chance at anything, because you have Gunner to finish. So you really have to win this week. If you lose, you're not 100% out, I don't think. But it's going to be really tough. You're going to need a tiebreaker, and even then, it may not help you. So if you're Hal, you're facing a team that knows it has to win this week, because it's going to end with Gunner, and you don't want to put any game of yours in the balance if you have to face Gunner to try to get into the playoffs. So it's at Hal, which is good. I don't think, and I haven't looked at it yet, I don't think Hal can clinch the playoffs with a win. They might, depending on some other results, but it's still a little complicated. And again, the reason for that is, as we move on to the next game in this district, the next tie in this district, you have Bells, like we said, you have Bells and Leonard at 2-1, and they're playing different opponents. Bells is going to play Lone Oak. They're hosting Lone Oak. Bells 6-2, 2-1. Lone Oak 0-8, 0-3. We talked about, obviously, Bells won last week against Hal, 37-14, and Lone Oak lost 85-0 against Gunner. And so if you're Bells, you go into this knowing that you can clinch a playoff spot with a win. So obviously you're playing for that. You are also playing on the off chance that if you can win out, maybe Gunner slips up and you can get a share of a district championship. But the best, like the last couple of years, you want to guarantee the best finish you can, which right now would be second. And they won a key game against Hal. Like we said, it was only 13-7 at halftime, but they pulled away in the second half, doing slot T things like they always do. They threw one pass that was incomplete, but they ran 35 times for 461 yards, leading the way Grady Waldrop, 15 carries, 273 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Spencer Hines, his only carry before he got hurt and sat out the rest of the game, was a 78-yard touchdown run. Brock Baker, 5 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. And the defense, like we said, obviously played really well in holding Howe to 7 points until the game was out of hand in the fourth quarter. So your Bells are in a good spot. Lone Oak is not very good. We talked about when we previewed Gunner last week. They haven't won a district game since 2019. They're 0 for the season. Things are not going well there. And if you're Bells, you can take a win, clinch a playoff spot, potentially lock in the second seed depending on how things go. But you're gonna finish with Leonard, so you're gonna have to probably win that one as well, potentially, if you want to get the second seed for sure. But you can't lock in a playoff spot this week, and that's always good. And then, of course, the reason that the Howe Blue Ridge scenario depends on these other games is because Leonard is going to take on Gunner. Gunner's going to host that game. Leonard 6-2, 2-1. Gunner 7-0, 3-0. We mentioned the results last week: 85-0 by Gunner over Lone Oak, and Leonard won 20-14 in a key game, and that key swing game there. I will point out, Gunner has never lost to Leonard. Gunner won last year 55-12, so there's that. Gunner will clinch the top seed for the playoffs. Leonard will clinch a playoff spot if they win. And then, of course, you would have potentially, if they were to pull this upset and Bells were to win like we expect them to, then you would have a legit showdown for not just a seed, but also a district championship share, because Gunner would have a loss. So Leonard obviously has a lot to play at stake. They've got a new coach. We've talked about that because it's Sherman's former offensive coordinator, Justin Dozier. And it's going to be interesting to see, Gunner, just that machine, what they did, last week. We said it was probably not going to go very well for Roanoke, and that was the case. They ran 24 times and gained 8 yards. It was 36-0 after the first quarter. The scoring by Roanoke, didn't even come close to happening in this game. We said how much they had struggled offensively this season. But like I said, Gunner's in that point where now where they're heading down the home stretch. They've got Leonard this week. They've got Blue Ridge next week. And they want to be able to roll into the playoffs and put together the deep run that they expect. In the winning over Roanoke, just to highlight a couple of guys: Ethan Sloan, 4 carries, 76 yards, 2 touchdowns. Walker Overman, passing wise, was 7 of 9 for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran 2 times for 61 yards. Luke Dodd was 6 of 6 passing for 74 yards and 2 touchdowns. Colin Peacock, another punt return for a touchdown, 60 yards. Mitchell Gage, 31-yard interception return. To highlight some of the receivers, Kanan Lindbergh, 4 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Dakota Lowry's lone catch, 60-yard touchdown. Hayden Ripamonte and Cole Harpole had touchdown catches. Spreading it all around like Gunner does. And so they have a chance to click off a couple goals. Get the top seed, get things going as we hit the home stretch here in the regular season. And like I said, you have a Leonard team that's going to try to make sure that they don't have they want to get things clinched in this district. Like I said, it's because everybody's playing somebody else. There's a lot of discrepancies in how teams can clinch or not clinch. And I try not to go into that because when there's a lot of action between, it's easier when they're playing each other, obviously. There is like I said, if Bells wins, they will clinch. I believe if Leonard wins, they clinch. But then after that, it's a little messy in terms of if this team wins, then this team needs this team, and it gets real complicated before we get to the final week of the season. So I try to avoid those when it's not very obvious. But the way things are shaping up, obviously Bells is in a good spot to lock in their spot, and if Howe takes care of business in their matchup, we could be looking at the 3 local teams in this district getting to the playoffs when all is said and done. Dropping down to District 6-2A Division 1, we have 3 games in this district. As the all local matchups are starting to dry up. And we have, looking at the standings before we touch on the matchups this week, you have the Tioga Bulldogs in first place at 3-0. You have Whitewright and Alvord tied at 2-1. You have Nakona and Trenton at 1-2. And you have Tom Bean in last place at 0-3. And obviously Tom Bean is unable to participate in the playoffs if they were to get there. The way things are looking right now, that wouldn't have happened anyway. They need to win out at this point to have a chance. But obviously they're out of our discussion for the playoffs. And so they're playing Nakona, who is coming off a 35-21 loss against Tioga, while Tom Bean lost last week 55-16 against Alvord. Tom Bean's going to be hosting this one. Nakona is 6-2, 1-2. Tom Bean is 2-6 and 0-3. And if like we've said all along with Tom Bean, Can you be a spoiler? That didn't happen obviously last week against Alvord, who jumped up 43-0 at halftime. I think that was. In the end, you got a couple touchdowns late. Gavin Hamilton with a touchdown run, and DJ Pearson with a touchdown run. Pearson also had a pair of 2-point conversions. Branson Ashlock threw for 115 yards. Alex Sanchez led the way, receiving 5 catches for 80 yards. But running game not very effective. Tomcats 38 yards on 31 carries. And again, can you be a spoiler? Nakona, obviously, we talked about them at the start of district play. They were undefeated coming in. They've already lost twice. They're in a precarious situation where they may not make the playoffs, despite starting their season 6-0, because I think they've lost the last 2, if I am correct. And I will check because I would like to be correct on that. Yes, they started 6-0, and they could end up not making the playoffs, just based on what's happening in this district. So they're obviously going to come out. It's a long trip, so you never know what that's going to mean. But obviously this is a game they have to win if they want to keep pace and try to go into that final game of the season with a chance to clinch a playoff spot, because I don't think they're not going to be able to clinch this week regardless of what happens around the district. So, but again, if you're Tom Bean, you get a chance to finish strong, maybe upset some people along the way, and so that's obviously the goal for a team that's going to have a lot of these guys back. There's not a lot of seniors, so you're getting this experience, and like I said, if you can pick somebody off, that can say a lot about the resolve, considering the kids know that they don't have a chance at the playoffs because of the UIL ruling from earlier in the season. So we'll see what happens when Tom Bean hosts Nakona. We'll work our way up the standings, I guess. That's probably the best way to do it. Whitewright is going to make a trip out to Alvord. Whitewright is 4-4 and 2-1 after they won last week 35-7 against Trenton. And we mentioned Alvord picked up the 55-16 win against Tom Bean. This is obviously a huge game, potentially for seeding. They're both tied for second place, so you're in a spot where you're comfortable enough. A win by Whitewright would clinch a playoff spot. A win by Alvord does not, because of potential matchup next week and other stuff in the district. So they could potentially clinch, but they need other stuff to happen. A win by Whitewright clinches a playoff spot and would give them a not just a playoff spot, but it would potentially give them an outside chance, or a chance at the district championship, because they're going to finish with Tioga. And if Tioga either loses this week or is undefeated, you would have potentially either a share of the district championship on the line in that last game. And so that's obviously a lot for Whitewright to play for. Put up a really good performance last week, like we said, in that 35-7 win. Jackson Evans led the way, 16 carries, 148 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Kenneth York, 12 carries for 80 yards. Tyler Ball with a touchdown run. Alex Reeves makes his first appearance of the season. He was originally supposed to be the starting quarterback, but was injured in the first scrimmage. He got some time in this one and had a touchdown run to cap the scoring. So that's an interesting wrinkle for the Tigers, that he didn't throw a pass, and not that there were a whole lot of passes thrown. Tyler Ball was 4 of 6 for 37 yards and an interception. So there wasn't a whole lot of passing, but it's a wrinkle. People haven't seen him. If he does do some stuff at the quarterback spot, or if he just helps out in terms of some other positions, that's a good sign there. And they held, obviously the defense played well, holding Trenton to just the 1 touchdown. And it's been a good bounce back after Whitewright lost to Nakona to open district play. The close game, they could easily be 3-0 and tied with Tioga going into this week. But they're in a really good spot. If they lose, again, it'll depend on what else happens in the district. There's a chance they could lose out and still make it, but you don't want any of that. You've got a chance to lock it up this week. Even though you're on the road, go take care of that. And if you're Alvord, like I said, you might be able to clinch a playoff spot depending on what some of the other stuff in the district. And the reason this district is so weird, and I know some people have been wondering, like, so Tioga's in first place, they haven't lost anybody. How would they not clinch the playoff spot? Well, they will clinch a playoff spot if they beat Trenton this week, and the reason is because of all the matchups in this district. I went through this when I do this every Friday night when I get all the scores and I put together the standings. That after this past Friday when they won 35-21 against Nakona, and Trenton lost 35-7 against Whitewright, that there was a chance that there could have been, or there could be, going into these final 2 weeks, a 5-way tie at 3-2. So that's why Tioga couldn't clinch. If Tioga lost out and all these other things happened, there could have been a 5-way tie for first place. So that's why Tioga hasn't been able to clinch yet, despite the fact that they're 3-0 and 6-2 on the season. But they can take care of that this week. And obviously it's a big game for Trenton too, because they're tied for fourth place with Nakona, and they have the tiebreaker over Nakona because they beat them last week 2 weeks ago 23-21. So you've got a chance to potentially have the upper hand for a playoff spot if you can find a way to beat Tioga, which nobody has yet. And Nakona certainly didn't last week. 35-21 in that loss to Tioga. Tioga runs for 320 yards. Jonah Grubbs leads the way, 33 carries, 181 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Chase Evans, 17 carries, 109 yards, and a touchdown. Greeley McAden has a 87-yard touchdown catch from Austin Norwood for his lone catch. Norwood 5 of 9, 103 yards, obviously most of it coming on that catch. But if you're Tioga, again, over 420 yards of offense, a game that was not really as close. I guess it was in the third quarter, but Tioga was up 21-6 at halftime, and then it was 21-14 going to the fourth quarter. But again, Tioga gets 2 touchdowns in the first 2.5 minutes of the fourth quarter to break things open. And so they're in a really good spot. If they win, not only do they clinch a playoff spot, they'll get at least a share of the district title, and then they can potentially win it outright when they play Whitewright. No matter what Whitewright does, because obviously Alvord would be a game back of them going into the last game. So it's been a really good season for Tioga. Obviously they've clinched a winning season. They've got a chance potentially to finish 8-2. Which and go undefeated in district play, and they're still waiting for Johnny Dorpinghouse to come back from his injury. I thought he might be back by this point. It depends on if you're, are they maybe just saving him for the playoffs, or maybe the last week of the season to get him a game worth of action to get back in the swing of things, or maybe it's just taking a little longer for him to heal up compared to what they thought. But Jonah Grubbs has just been fantastic for them. He was going to start the year as the third option in the backfield because you had Evans as a senior who's been there, done that, did it last year. Dorpinghouse came in last year as a freshman, was really electric as a receiver and as a running back and as a returner, and so obviously you had that duo ready to come back again to do it again, and then Dorpinghouse gets hurt and Grubbs just has stepped right in. And has been great. 3 of the last 4 games specifically, he's had some just monster games. And so Tioga hasn't skipped a beat. They've done really well here down the stretch, and I know they're gonna wanna they want that 5-0. They want to go into the playoffs really hot off a district championship and an 8-2 record. So going to be interesting to see what Trent can do against them. Like I said, they've got to play with some urgency as well if they want to try to get into the playoffs again this year. So that's going to be interesting there as well. And then the last game, if Whitesboro and Paradise is not the game of the week, this is the one that will give it a run for its money, and that is Collinsville going to Munster in 8-2A Division II action. This is a 7 o'clock start, so pay attention to that if you're going to make the trip out to Munster. 7 o'clock start. You have Collinsville, who is 7-1 and 4-0 after they won last week 39-28, the big win against Santo to get sole possession of first place. And you have Munster, who won against rival Lindsay 38-23. So they are 4-4 and 3-1. And this is a district where we know all the playoff teams. Collinsville in first place, 4-0. And then Munster, Santo, and Celeste are all 3-1. And they have all clinched. It's all now down to seeding. Munster trying to get a win against Collinsville to potentially force a multi-team championship, district championship. Collinsville can clinch the top seed for the playoffs with a win. Obviously Munster is Munster. We talked about earlier, they went to Santo, had the lead at halftime, could not hang on to it, so that's their only loss. And last week, the Pirates in their showdown with Santo found a way to pull this game out. It was tied at 14 at halftime. It was tied at 21 going to the fourth quarter. But the Pirates were able to make some big plays in this game. Logan Jenkins, 24 of 39 passing, 265 yards, with 2 touchdown passes. Did have an interception. He also ran for a score. Rylan Newman had a touchdown run. Parker Wells had a fumble return for a touchdown. Reed Patterson had one of the touchdown catches. Nathan Bocanegra, 11 catches, 87 yards, and had the other one. Carter Scott, 4 catches for 94 yards. Colin Barnes chipped in 5 for 54. And it was sort of an opposite. I think we talked about this in the preview. Santo, very good defensively. They like to run the ball. They did run the ball in this one. They gained 290 yards, but they only had 46 yards passing. They did have 3 turnovers compared to 2 for Collinsville, so Collinsville had the slight edge there. And Collinsville was unable to really move the ball on the ground. 79 yards on 37 carries, but they got the job done through the air. Each team had an interception, or a defensive touchdown. The one for Santo was an interception return in the fourth quarter. Jenkins also kicked a field goal. And so that the game moved up to what we thought it was going to be. And Collinsville actually moved into the rankings this week. The Pirates are number 8. Santo is number 9. So that's obviously a feather in the cap of what they're doing over at Collinsville. We talked about, they won 4 games last year. They're at 7 and counting, and they're state ranked. They had so many guys coming back. We thought they would have a really good year, and now you've got one more hurdle to get over. And these teams actually played last year in non-district play. Munster won 56-13. So even though Munster is 4-4, which is very atypical for them, they usually have a very good record. They played a really tough non-district schedule. They played Pottsboro. They played Bells. They played some really good teams in higher classifications. They're still getting the job, and they played Santo, who obviously is state ranked, and 7-1 also is like Collinsville. They live for big games. They're coming off a rivalry win. They've got a chance to force a tie for first place. And so can Collinsville do it again? Obviously huge win last week, emotional, down to the wire, took some big fourth quarter play to get that win. Are you going to have the letdown? We could probably say the same thing for Munster. You had your big rivalry matchup against Lindsay. And that was a game that was close for a little bit, and then Munster was able to pull away. Can you put those games behind you with what's at stake this week? And if you're Collinsville and you can do that, then you end with a Chico team that is out of the race, and you have a chance to go undefeated in district play. potentially finish your season 9-1 and you lock up the top seed. Don't have to worry about tiebreakers and this and that. And going into the last game of the season, you'll have the top seed if you win this game. So if Paradise Whitesboro is not the number one game, I think this is the number 2 game right here for what's at stake for playoffs and what that means in your path, and obviously Conzo has a chance to put a cap on a really good year if they can win this one and then win their finale and be 9-1 and 6-0 going into the playoffs. So that's where we are heading into week 10. Hopefully we'll know a lot more after this week. We may have, like we said, looks like some people will be locking up playoff spots again. We'll start talking about looking ahead to that. Again, I guess there's potential weather this weekend, and so Friday night there could be some games that get affected by that. So that may be an issue. You never know. A lot of people are playing on turf, but some of these games are going to be on grass, and you wonder how bad the field conditions are going to be, and that may change things totally. So we'll see what happens here in week 10 of the football season. It's crazy to think that the season's going to end, the regular season's going to end next week, but that's the way football go, as to paraphrase a wise baseball man. So we'll see what happens. Enjoy the games. If you are out, try to stay dry. That may be an issue. And we'll talk to you next week.